Last week for science, we talked about two things. We talked about number one, how do you do a, a correct or a proper scientific experiment? And number two, we talked about science safety. Today, we're going to take a quiz about those things, but before we do the quiz, I want to make sure that we go over what we talked about last week, just in case we forgot anything over the weekend. Okay? So, scientific investigation. There are a couple of steps. Sometimes it's called the scientific process. So, step number one, you ask a question. Step number two, you plan your test. And usually you have a hypothesis. You take a guess about what the answer is. You start to plan your test and you get whatever equipment or anything that you need to do your test. Then you take all that information you get and you have to organize it. You have to put it all together and organize it in a way that makes sense. Then we go ahead and we look for a pattern. We look to see if there's something that we notice keeps happening over and over again. And finally, we make an inference or a conclusion. Edin.
So it's basically like we're doing a experiment.
Yep. So a science experiment is the same thing as a scientific investigation, or scientific investigation or science experiment is usually the way we'll see it written down in fourth grade. But sometimes they might also call it like a test, a scientific test.
Do we need anything to buy to like do it?
Well, it would depend on what you're testing. Some science experiments or some investigations, if you have all the things already, you don't need to buy anything extra. Some of them, if you don't have something or you're missing something, then you might have to end up buying it. We're not going to do one right now. We're just going over the steps of how to do one. So,
Okay.
if you were going to do one at your house, and let's say that you were going to do an experiment about apples, let's say different kinds of apples. So, you wanted to test what kind of apples are heavier, red apples or green apples. Well, if you already had the red and green apples at your house, then you have everything, right? You just need red apples, green apples, and a scale.
Yep.
But if you only have green apples at your house, then you might have to go buy the red apples.
Yep.
So it just depends on what you're going to use.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. So here are really important things to remember when we're talking about scientific investigations. Okay? So, number one, whatever test you're doing, it has to be a fair test. So you can't start your test going, well, let's take the apple one, for example, and you're trying to figure out which apples are usually heavier. You can't go and pick, let's say, between the red and the green apples. You can't go to the store and buy the biggest green apples you can find and then the tiniest red apples you can find, because that's not fair. You'd have the big green apples and then teeny tiny red apples. That's not the same. You'd want to find apples that are about the same size. Or if we talked about last week, the example of the two cars racing to figure out which car is faster. To be fair, both of those cars have to start on the starting line. One of those cars can't start a little bit ahead because then it wouldn't be fair to the other car. If you were going to do, say, a science experiment with, I don't know, erasers, trying to figure out which eraser works better, you can't have one eraser erasing pencil and the other one erasing pen, because that's not fair. So you have to make sure that whatever test you have, it's a fair test. Number two, Remember that when you're getting all the things together for your experiment, to not forget if you need safety equipment. So if there's something, let's say you're going to do an experiment with dirt. You're going to do an experiment with dirt and you know that it's going to be windy or there's going to be a lot of air blowing around, then wearing a pair of goggles might be a good idea so you don't get dirt in your eyes. Or if you're going to be doing an experiment with, let's say, paint or with chemicals or things like that, then goggles would still be a good idea, but you might also want to wear an apron to protect your clothes. That way you don't get paint or chemicals all over your clothes and ruin them. Remember, you want to test more than once. If you test one time, that gives you a little bit of information. If you test over and over and over and over again, it gives you a lot of information. And the more information you have, the better your answer is. So don't just test once, test as many times as you can. Like it says here, the more you test, the better. When they do scientific studies to see if something helps or if it doesn't help or anything like that, they test it hundreds or thousands of times. They don't just do it once and then go, yeah, it helps. They have to test it over and over and over again to make sure that they can see and they can show, look, it helps every single time, or it helps most of the time, or not. Not just we tried it once and it worked, so I guess it's okay. And the last thing, if your hypothesis, if your guess is wrong, that's okay. It's just a guess. So even if your guess was wrong from the beginning, that doesn't mean that you messed up or it's a bad experiment or something didn't work. It just means at the beginning, I didn't know. But now that I finished, I do know. All right. Oh, sorry. Before we get to science safety rules, does anyone else have any more questions about scientific investigations or scientific tests? No more questions. Bailey, you have a question?
I've been trying to um, make slime without glue before.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to try different things
Mm-hmm.
with like cornstarch, salt, with dish soap,
So
but it didn't work at the first time. But I added like something else and it did work, but I don't remember what.
so that wouldn't be a bad example, so long as you remember. One of the important things is when you do a scientific test or a scientific investigation, you want to change only one thing at a time. So, like the example of you making the slime. If you kept all of the ingredients the same and then only changed one thing. So you said like originally you didn't want to make it with glue. So you had all the other ingredients the same, just no glue. And then you try, okay, instead of glue, what if I put this? And you can see, like you said, maybe the first time it doesn't work. All right, well, let's try with this next one and see if it does work. So long as you're only changing one thing at a time, that's a great example. And like you said, even if it doesn't work out at first, if that first one doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that that's terrible and everything was wrong. It just means that you didn't know at first. But that's the whole point of doing a scientific test or a scientific investigation, is so that you can learn. Is there anyone else that has a question about scientific tests or investigation before we continue? No? No more questions? Okay, let's look at our science safety rules then. So don't forget science safety rules. Number 1, know the class emergency plan. Or I guess for now that we're at our houses, know your house emergency plan. Number 2, follow instructions carefully. Number 3, do not eat, taste, drink, or smell anything unless you're told to. Who remembers I told you all that in science, when you're going to smell something, you never just take whatever it is and put it underneath your nose. What did you have to do in science to smell something? Kaylee, what did you have to do in science to smell something?
Ask a teacher before what's it called before you do anything.
Okay, so perfect. You would want to make sure that you ask, say, hey, is this okay that I smell this? But if the teacher says okay, how would you smell it? Because even if the teacher says yes, you don't put it right here. How do you smell something in a science experiment? Kaylee, do you remember?
You keep it a little down or in front, and then so nothing gets infected.
Not so it doesn't get infected, but it's to be safe. And so you're right. You keep it a little bit down and in front of your face. And then how do you get the smell to go to your face? Who can tell me? Because there's a lot of space here. How would you actually smell it? Violet?
You would do this.
Perfect. That's a very, very good example. You would take your hand and you'd push the air on top of whatever it is, and you push it into your face. And if you do that with your hand, you can feel it. You can feel the air hitting your face. So if you're going to smell something in a science experiment, you never put it right underneath your nose. You always put it in front of your face and a little bit down, like Kaylee said, and then you use your hand and you push the air toward your face. And that's how you smell something. Again, don't forget, that's also really useful if you're helping mom or dad when they're cooking. You don't want to put your face right on top of boiling soup or anything. But if you go like this and you push the air toward your face, you're still able to smell it, and you don't have to worry about, boiling water or soup or pudding or whatever it is you're making. Here we go. Wear goggles when things can get into your eyes. So that could also be for any kind of safety equipment. You wear goggles to protect your eyes. You wear aprons to protect your clothes. You wear gloves to protect your hands. So if there's any kind of danger to anything, if there's a danger to your clothes, wear an apron. There's danger to your eyes, wear goggles. There's danger for your hands, wear gloves. Just like if any of you have either helped mom or dad, or you've seen mom or dad using the oven to bake something, you don't just reach into the oven with your bare hands to grab something because it's hot. You have to use a special kind of gloves, the oven mitts, to pull things out of the oven. Kylie.
I can't hear you.
If you're not able to hear, try leaving the call and then coming back in, okay?
I can't hear you.
Call. He said try leaving the call and then get back.
Okay. Thank you for your help, Kaylee. Next one, don't forget, if you see something that's unsafe or you see somebody that's being unsafe, you let the teacher know. Should you wait until the teacher later on, or should you tell the teacher right away? What do you think, Bailey? Should you wait until the teacher afterwards or tell the teacher right away?
Tell the teacher right away.
Right away. The sooner that you let the teacher know, the sooner that they can fix that, and the less of a chance that something happens where either the experiment's ruined or somebody gets hurt. And number 7, tell the teacher right away if you're hurt, even if you aren't hurt bad. Why is that part of the rule? That you should tell the teacher if you get hurt, even if it's like a little bit. Even if it's not a big cut or that your arm didn't fall off or something like that. Why would you still have to tell the teacher right away? Who can tell me? Why is that important? To tell the teacher right away, even if it's a small injury or a small accident. Violet?
Because you can actually be hurt.
You can be hurt, and even if it's not very bad, it's better to get it taken care of before it gets worse.
Can even get infected.
That's true. Depending on what you're working with in the science experiment or the science investigation, something could get into it, and you don't want the cut or the injury to get any worse, to get infected or anything else. All right. So, like I said, we are going to take a quiz. So I want you all to go ahead and go into our Google Classroom. You're going to go to classwork up on the top. On the left side where our topics are, you're going to find science. You're going to click there. And we're looking for science quiz number 1. Science quiz number 1. You're going to click on there. You're going to find this rectangle. And that'll take you to quiz. So there are some questions on here. Like before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read the questions for you along with the answer choices. If you want to stay at the same pace as I do, that's completely fine. If you want to work a little bit ahead of me, that's also fine. Just make sure that whether you're at the same pace as me or you're going faster, or even if you're going a little slower, make sure that you put an answer for every single question before you hit submit. I'm going to start with question number 1. Question number 1, how many times should you test to see if your idea is correct? Just once is fine. You should test many times. You don't have to test, or not here. Pick whichever answer choice you think is the best one.
Mine's still loading.
Okay, if it's still loading, just give it a minute to load, Christopher. Like I said, don't worry if you're a little bit behind me. That's okay. All right, our next question. When there is a chance that small pieces can be flying through the air toward your face, what should you wear? Gloves, a headband, an apron, or goggles? Which one of those should you wear when there is a chance that small pieces can be flying through the air toward your face? Violet, you have a question?
You forgot the top.
Which one?
Number 1.
I read that one already. If you want, I can read it again, though.
Okay.
How many times should you test to see if your idea is correct? Just once is fine. You should test many times. You don't have to test, or not here. So that was question 1. Question 2 was, when there is a chance that small pieces can be flying through the air toward your face, what should you wear? Gloves, a headband, an apron, or goggles? Okay. Question number 3. If you have a small injury, like a paper cut, you don't have to tell your teacher. You have to decide, is that true or is that false? Okay. Next question. When you are doing a scientific investigation, you need to make sure that your test is fair. You need to decide, is that true or is that false? When you're doing a scientific investigation, you need to make sure that your test is fair. True or false? Okay. Next question. What is the first step in a scientific investigation? Make a hypothesis, make a test, gather information or data, or ask a question. Pick whichever one you think is the best one. What is the first
Mine's
step in a
still
scientific
loading.
investigation? Make a hypothesis, make a test, gather information or data, or ask a question. If it's still loading, Christopher, that's fine. Again, you just gotta be patient, especially with the internet. Sometimes it's pretty slow. All right. Our next question. If you don't know what to do next in a science activity, what should you do? You make something up, you ask a friend, you ask the teacher, or you just give up. If you don't know what to do next in a science activity, what should you do? Make something up, ask a friend, ask the teacher, or just give up. All right. If you see someone else doing something unsafe, what should you do? Ignore them, tell the teacher, laugh at them, or keep doing your work. If you see someone else doing something unsafe, what should you do? Ignore them, tell the teacher, laugh at them, or keep doing your work. All right. Next one. If your hypothesis was wrong, that means that you messed up your experiment. Is that true or false? If your hypothesis is wrong, that means you messed up your experiment. Is it true or false? All right. Next question. Can you eat something in a scientific investigation? Only if it looks tasty. You can only eat a little bit. You can never eat something, or you can eat something if your teacher says you can. Can you eat something in a scientific investigation? You gotta pick an answer choice. only if it looks tasty. You can only eat a little bit. You can never eat something, or you can eat if your teacher says you can. And then we have one final question. Do you need to follow all of our science safety rules? Yes, no, only when you feel like it, or only when the teacher is around. Do you need to follow all of our science safety rules? Yes, no, only when you feel like it, or only when the teacher is around. That's the last question, but make sure before you press submit that you go up and you check and you make sure that you have an answer for all of the questions before you press submit. But once you do that, you're finished. Just go ahead and wait for everyone else to catch up.